All right. So we're going to talk about our learning objectives today. So networking roles in topology, we're going to essentially see where you fit into networks and how those networks as a macro and meso organization of people and connections forms. We're going to talk about making sure that you connect with the right people instead of just trying to give everybody your business card. Then we'll help you build those connections. And once you've built those connections, continue to nurture that relationship. And then we'll look at some of the career outcomes for networking. So the first question I have for you is, what is networking to you? What comes to mind? How does it feel? You can go ahead and drop that in the chat for me. Oops. For most people, it feels like this guy. And I think we're all nervous because we know we've had somebody try to network with us, and then it winds up feeling like they're this guy. So hopefully I can get us past this here. That's going to start with a couple of things. So the first question then is going to be, what's networking to you? You can drop that in the chat. I'd be curious to see your answers.
This is not a lecture, it's interactive, so you've got to participate.
Yeah. Okay. Branding yourself, professional contacts. That's pretty good. I like it, Raven. Thank you. Anyone else? I see Derek put a comment in there about building and maintaining connections. And then Marilyn, you've got connections and sharing experiences. That's pretty cool. So I feel like I forgot to tell you. So the technical definition of a network essentially is just connections among people. There we go. This is the nerd's definition right here. So let's talk about real quick what a network is. Basically, it is in the term of a social network as opposed to like a computer network or like an ecosystem network and all these other things. It's usually just people and there's some connection between them. So we can look here at Gull's definition. He talks about the social structure of individuals and how they're related with a common relation of interest. So whether that be maybe you go to the same church, maybe you work in the same industry, maybe you play for the same, I don't know, frisbee league or whatever it is out there. Disc golf, that's what they call it. Uh, then you've got Wasserman and Faust. They talk about a set of actors. So each person is called an actor. It's also known as a node and some other things right there. And their specific ties. And the ties where you talk about their friendship, relationship, connection, competition, all those other things. And from the top down, looking at everything, that's your perspective of a network. So everybody tells you to network. Everybody here wants to network, but has anybody thought about why it's worth networking beyond just we know we should do it? It's something good for business. If not, if you're all researchers like I am, I like to develop research partnerships. Now, part of that is connecting with other researchers that have skills I don't necessarily have, but also as a social scientist, I need access to organizations. So some company has to let me in and give their employees a bunch of surveys on work time and then let me go run wild and play with their data. So having that mutual relationship makes that a lot easier. So that would be access to a closed group. Mentorship is one of the big ones I look at. So finding people that can help you advance your career and talking about career development, you can see a bunch of stats here about how networking is facilitating job opportunities. I personally have the philosophy you should never submit a job application unless you're invited to. Now let's talk about a bit of the structure here. Over here on the left, you'll see this humans here. So these are just regular people. But in this next box here, you see the organizational structure. And those people can fall anywhere in that structure realistically. What happens is you wind up with this social network here where it's not always just the top down, right? Like this person here isn't connected to their, I guess we'll call them peers at the same level. Whereas, this person here has access to this guy that's way over there through his network. But in terms of getting to this one here, the only way they can do that is going up and then coming back down. Overall, you wind up with an organization. You have the people filling those specific roles, and then the organization has its own mission and culture and things like that that guide how that network operates. So here is just some small, here. Might have broke it. I don't know. Hang on. Okay. So here is, you know what? I screwed that one up. I think I might have set my timer. Let's do this here. There we go. All right. Cool. So these are just some basic networks, small networks. So you're not looking at like everybody in an organization necessarily, but most networks are comprised of some variation of these smaller ones here. Just a key point here, the blue thing is not necessarily the person in charge. A lot of people just kind of assume that. It's called the ego, and that's just the person we're focused on. Now, on the left here, you see the wheel. That's where somebody's pushing things out to different people. Maybe they are like a receptionist that's saying, you need to go down the hall this way and you need to go down the hall that way. Maybe it's information where somebody receives an email and says, oh, okay, this is about fellowships. This person needs it. This is about research opportunities. That person needs it, and you disseminate the information that way. Looking at the chain, the easiest way to think of that is like that game of telephone. It's also how the rumor mill works. So you're not necessarily sure what's going to come out at the other end, but sometimes that's the only way to get to people. The circle network is pretty straightforward. It just goes in a circle. It's a little bit different from the all channel because everybody has a shortcut to the rest of the network in terms of robustness. And if things happen, if somebody's out sick, if part of the telecommunication system falls apart, this all channel network tends to be your best bet to keep operations going. Now, these are all comprised of dyads, right? So the dyad is just two people. So you see I and you see J. That's just imagine people that are like on, we'll say LinkedIn, and they see each other, but they aren't necessarily connected. But then you look here and you see this non-directional line between I and J. So in this case, I is connected to J, or I am connected to J if you're an English major. The next line down, we look at the directionality, right? So I is pushing things to J, and then J is pushing things back to I separately. The ideal scenario is the one at the bottom where you see that mutual transition of goods, resources, information, whatever that may be. So these are some of the common challenges that I see to networking. I'm curious to see what you guys find to be your biggest challenge in networking. If I want to call anything out, drop it in the chat. Different time zones. Yeah, okay. So you're talking about a temporal network. That's true. Anyone else? Making the initial connection, sustaining the connection over time. All right. Yeah, that can be challenging. Thank you, Maya. Derek, what do you got? Well, you're thinking really hard there. And you guys can come off mute if you want to. Finding people who want meaningful connections. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge there too. So, is there anything here that is easy for anyone else? It's not an issue. And you can come off mute. You can put it in the chat. Any thoughts?
That one-on-one time is hard because I was in chapter 2 or 3 of my dissertation, and I found an author, and I liked their work, so I emailed them and tried to set up an appointment,
Mm-hmm.
and they only offered me 3 minutes.
Damn, that's harsh.
Wow.
And I got a email back from the person.
Mm-hmm.
They said 2 months from the time I emailed, they could squeeze me in for 6 minutes, and I'm like,
Wow. I'm not going to ask who this was, but I do want to know.
it's with some people, especially if you're trying to move up,
Mm-hmm.
there's some people who are not is not willing to share. They're going to keep whatever their secrets are, their secret sauce is, either to themselves or to their own personal network.
Yeah.
So you're not going to, sometimes with some people,
Hmm.
you're not going to get in if they don't want to share.
Yeah. So it's interesting too, right? Because one of the aspects of networking is gaining access to those closed networks I talked about earlier. And it sounds like you experienced that. You ran into a network that was sort of like, this is us, you're on the outside. I will say that 3 minute increments suggest to me that they just have like a personal assistant and a really packed schedule. But I will tell you the way I wound up going for a PhD is I'm a first generation student. I had no idea what I was doing. And I looked at a university and saw that like all their faculty in business were coming from Georgetown. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry, all the faculty, I said that wrong. I picked university, all of them were coming from Boston. There we go. And I was like, I don't know what's going on in Boston, but I'm going to just run up to Boston. I jumped on an Amtrak from DC and then just basically cold called a bunch of professors. And I didn't know about commencement week because I'm a first generation student. So like a lot of them were responding for their emails like, I'm at the airport, I'm going to be gone, whatever. One guy said, yeah, come on down. He's local. And the first question I asked to respect your time is how long do you have? He said, I have 20 minutes. So I talked to him for 20 minutes. And then an hour and a half later, he gave me the full rundown of I need to do, get my GMAT scores. I need to talk to certain people. I'm going to put you in touch with these folks. And when you get back home, there's these folks that are local to you. I'm going to put you in touch with them and everything. So I don't know what I was doing at the time, but in that 20 minutes, I apparently made an impression that he decided he should keep talking to me. And he really took an interest. So I kind of got lucky there. And I think part of it was just sort of the gumption to just show up and say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to make it work. So it's really interesting with networking. Half the battle is showing up, but showing up in a way that they're ready to receive you is a different challenge. So what I find, especially when somebody says I have 3 minutes, my whole objective is to get them alone later so that I can actually have, a full meeting with them for, whatever it is or however long it is. And sometimes you have to work that lead for a while. We'll probably talk about it a bit more as we go with things like 5 minute favors and like staying relevant and showing that you add value to them, even though they haven't necessarily said, yes, I'm going to help you with, something that's very important to you and not even on my radar. So hopefully this will be useful to you. Does anybody have any other, I don't know, solutions to any of these problems? That would be kind of cool to hear. And the cool part is I get to be mean and say we aren't moving until somebody gives me a solution to something. I know it's an abuse of power, but we'll call it networking and training.
I look at your chart and I see at the top where it says, I'm not a people person.
Mhm.
And I'd like to challenge people on that because I was doing a workshop recently
Mhm.
and someone told me, they said, well, I'm just not good at small talk. So I can't talk to people during interviews. And I said, nope, I'm calling you on that. I said, because I don't know you, but I'm sure that you don't have problems talking with your friends and talking with people who are in your family. And she's like, no, I don't. I said, so you just proved my point. You just don't want to talk to strangers.
Mhm.
And you've got to learn to talk to strangers because all of those people who are your friends were strangers at one point.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I want to say it's Dale Carnegie. He said strangers are just friends we haven't met yet. But the other side of that coin is I'll say if you can listen, you can network because the ideal scenario is to get them to talk about what's important to them and help you understand them better. And then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people get a little weirded out and they're just like, okay, I'm in the spotlight too long because then they realize, they're kind of doing what you were afraid to do. So, being a little mindful of that and creating a safe space for them now that that power dynamic has shifted a little bit will be a little tool you can put in your toolkit. And how you go about that, I have some resources I'll share with you. So let's go ahead and take a look at some other things here. Now, we did talk about some of the common networking challenges, and most people have this solution here of being just so awesome at whatever it is they're responsible for that nobody can help but notice how awesome they are. The problem with that is that you get pigeonholed because it's a lot easier for your boss to say, like, man, it's really easy having this one guy do this one thing that nobody else wants to do. I don't have to worry about it. I can yell at everybody else. So I'm never going to tell you to not be good at what you do. You always have to deliver, but how you deliver and who knows how you deliver, those are two very different conversations. All right. So here, we're going to talk about bases of power. Marilyn, you just mentioned talking to people's friends and family and everything. And well, it turns out we already have a network. We just don't view it that way because, we have familial ties or friendships and everything already exists. But they do kind of bring some assets, if you will, with them to that relationship. Now, on the left here, you'll see positional power. So you remember that triangle Christmas tree organization org chart that I showed earlier? The stuff here on the right, on the left side rather, is all the stuff that comes with being in a particular box. Whether you have control of the resources or you're allowed to dole out discipline or give people pay raises, etc. On the right, this is all the stuff that you bring to the table. So the person that's sitting in that box, whether you are a subject matter expert or anything like that. Now, the interesting thing, the number 2 through 4, you can always get more of that. Just go to school, learn something. Information is usually like who talks to who. The one I like to focus on is referent power up here. This is the only one that other people give you in terms of power. Everything else you can get for yourself. So I like to lean on this one personally, just because it's the most valuable, but you have to learn how to leverage it appropriately. And that's different for everyone. So there's no cookie cutter response there. All right, let's take a look. All right. Anybody know the rest of this phrase here?
It's who you
Who
know.
you know.
Everybody says that. Okay. You're sure?
It's who knows
you.
you.
You're stealing my answers now. Anybody know who that is?
Beyonce.
Yeah.
And Taylor Swift.
Yeah, somebody had to know her. Okay. Well, this is the thing, right? Based on the it's who you know logic, you guys are networked with these folks, right? So
Not at all.
yeah, exactly, right? I want you to think of something real quick. I want to we're going to put you on a desert island and you're going to be there for a while, for a year. And I want you to think of somebody that you're going to take on that desert island with you. And you can go ahead and drop that in the chat, who you're taking on this desert island trip with you. And just to be clear, it's not a tropical island. It's not a resort. It's a desert. Because some folks get excited about that. And I will wait for an answer from everyone. So we got some time. Okay. That's somebody taking their mom after she's had pilot training, even though there's no runway on this desert island. But yeah, okay. I'm just busting your chops, Monique. It's okay. I like what you're thinking. MacGyver. All right. Interestingly, MacGyver was a chemist. So if he brings his little chemistry set, we're going to hook it up. This is tough. Yeah. Well, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And Maya, since I know you, I still expect an answer. Your sister. All right, cool. So this is the interesting thing. We've got these two sort of pockets here. I'm assuming that Maya, you're close with your sister. And most people will pick either some version of Bear Grylls or MacGyver, right? Because they're like, I'm going to survive this. I'm going to get off the island. The other people are like, I'm going to feel good about it while we die. We can both struggle together. Exactly, right? So this is the thing, right? This goes back to the comment earlier. It's not who you know, it's who knows you. These people are the one that came to mind for a situation that you would not want to be in. And likewise, when you're networking with people, you want to be the one that comes to mind when they have a situation like this. Now, that situation might be, I need a methodologist on this paper, or I need to have someone that's willing to travel to, some indigenous population in South America that nobody's even seen in the past 100 years or something. whatever it is, you need to be the person they think about. And they're going to think about you either one is you have this critical skill set they need, you know, the Bear Grylls survival situation, or you're someone I want to work with and we can always train you up in what we need you to do, but I want this to be an enjoyable experience. Any thoughts or questions on that? All right. So when we get to targeted networking, that's where things change, right? Like you're not going to just go out there and shotgun the entire world or everybody at the conference or the job fair or whatever it is. You need to make sure that the people you need to know understand how you add value personally and professionally, right? So you're on both sides of that personal connection, professional skill set, and they need to know, like, and trust you. So that's a bit more of the marketing thing if anybody's got that background. And then your relevant goals. So there's things they're going to do, but there's also things that you're going to do that could potentially help them, or they may just like you enough that something comes into their inbox, has nothing to do with them, but they're like, oh, hey, Derek could use this. So, you know, maybe getting you access to that one person who had 3 minutes saying, hey, an email from this professor will get you, I don't know, 9 minutes if you're lucky, it sounds like. All right. So remember we talked about these different structures. We talked about the, you know, the wheel and the full channel, all channel and everything else. I want you to take away here is that you always build your well before you're thirsty, right? You don't want to like, whoops. You don't want to be trying to figure it out when you suddenly need it. Oh no, I did do that right. I'm sorry. I always say give before you receive, give more often. A lot of people, when I say give more than you receive, some people think that it means like, you know, you give them $1 million and they give you a cup of water. Like, no, you just give them $1 a couple times and you get your thing of water here. It's very important that you be open and authentic. So if you look here, this is the follow-up side. This is called a desire path. You see that the network here of paths is established and you're supposed to go over there to the right and then kind of hook back around. And the problem is you want to keep following up so that the desire path winds up like this, that it's a well-worn road and that it's so strong that it'll survive, you know, gaps or issues and everything else, and they'll continue to be there. And then you look at the tier two network. That's where you're looking at not just them as the target, but what that target provides you access to. So there's somebody that knows that professor you mentioned that will get that professor to like change their schedule or meet you after hours or whatever it is. It can be done, but figuring out how that happens is going to take a bit of legwork. Okay, so yeah, I remember, I believe it was you, Marilyn. We talked about all the friends and everything in our network, right? So I want you guys to make friends. It's a lot simpler to have a conversation with your friend. It's a lot more joyful to give things to your friend and do favors for your friend. And they're a lot more comfortable doing those favors and reciprocating for you. Again, they need to like you for yourself, because if you try to fake it, at some point they're going to notice you're not who you said you were, and they're going to think you're shady or duplicitous or any other number of things, you know, trying to sell them that used car. So some of the issues we find are like, you know, getting that one-on-one time or meeting the right people. If you go volunteer to man a desk at a special event or something, you're on a conference committee, you now have access to say, hey, I need a speaker for, you know, our field's conference and all this. All of a sudden they're like, oh, I've got a lot more than 3 minutes because it advances my career.
Mm-hmm.
So before you start, before you take aim at anything, you got to know what your target looks like. So you need to know why you're trying to network. So whether that be for mentorship or any other thing like that, try to find a job or anything, whatever. You need to understand what's in it for them, right? So your target's goals, they have some objectives they're trying to meet. You need to find a way that you fit into that, or at least don't work against it, because it's never going to work out then. You need to know your worth. So things like how you add value, these are the things you can offer them. And then the I don't do small talk kind of I'm going to call it an excuse, because if you just read the news every morning, you'll have something that you can talk about, or at least ask a question about. And then you share things like your experiences, the hobbies, the challenges you're facing. When you learn foreign languages through some of the government agencies, they use FORTE, F-O-R-T-E, so family, occupation, recreation, travel, and entertainment or expertise, depending on who you're talking to. So now we've talked about your side of things. Now we need to look at the other side. So who we're going to target. So some potential outcomes you might be looking for. Maybe it's time on their schedule. Maybe you need some information from them because they're a subject matter expert, right? Maybe you need somebody to, I don't know, get your dissertation chair to kind of behave themselves. Oops, what just happened there? There we go. So, you know, somebody that can influence other people, things like that. Over here, getting access to people that you know normally wouldn't talk to or normally wouldn't have any sort of interaction with. Maybe they can facilitate that handshake for you. I like to focus on mentorship. So, you know, ways that people can help me develop myself because they know the things that I don't know, and I want their past to be my future. Those are some things that I like to look at. So you take the Raggins and McFarland model and look at mentorship. These are some of the things that a mentor may do for you. They don't necessarily do them all, but if they do, you better like make sure you get them really good Christmas gifts and birthday gifts. You probably just get them something every month, really. All right. So keep this list here in mind. And then the at least national, I want to say National Faculty of Color. I can't remember. I apologize. Citations in the corner here. As academics, this is a bit of a network map for us, right? Of mentors and people who mentor us in specific things. And understand that if you're networking for mentorship, like it's kind of unfair to have one mentor try to do all the things on this list, which is why every aspect has 3 or 4 people that do the same thing. So as a first generation student, this part for me is really important. I need somebody to tell me like, you know, the things that were important before you got here are nice, but they don't matter here. You need to do these other things and maybe show up at these things, submit to these specific conferences, and not just be doing things for the sake of doing them, but do them in this way so that the right people notice you. Any questions on this? All right. So if you were to think about it like hunting or fishing, you need to know what you're going after, right? You got to use the right kind of bait. You got to go to the right part. You're not going to catch any saltwater fish in the Great Lakes, for example. So understanding what it is that they have that you need. So in this case here, I have like proximity to whatever the relevant node is. So that's access to another person. It could also be to a resource that can get you into a library or something that you need to get access to if you're an archaeologist doing, you know, some specific study. They have control of those relevant resources. So remember, they're in the right box that allows them to move these things wherever they need to without getting themselves in any kind of trouble by trying to like do a special favor for anybody. You really need to understand their motivations. So why is it what they're trying to accomplish in life, personally and professionally, but then what their motive is for helping you out if they choose to do so, if you choose to work with them. And then some people, you know, this guy right here, openness to connecting. I have 3 minutes. So they might not be open to it. It's okay. I'm picking on this person. Don't tell me who they are because I might start saying their name by accident. But also like, do you want them in your network, right? Like, because there's just some people that, you know, maybe they have the skill set, but they're really abusive. You know, we've all heard those horror stories about somebody winding up on the faculty or on a dissertation committee. And, you know, maybe they're yelling at you or doing all kinds of nonsense to make your life more difficult in this already challenging process. So sometimes you might need to go ahead and decide it's better to cut them out no matter what they offer. And then most importantly, can you nurture this relationship? And that's going to be, you know, something that's unique to you and your style and how you nurture relationships, whether you text them just because, or if you know, send them handwritten letters on a regular basis, whatever that case may be. So step 1, the hard part, initiating that relationship, walking up to somebody, cold calling them. I'll be real, I think I got crazy messing with this timer situation to keep me on track. So, it's supposed to be 3 minutes, I think. It's 3 seconds. There we go. Okay, I think we're good. So most common place to meet people is at some sort of conference or something. So, you know, you definitely get their contact information. I'll say this too. A lot of people think that if they give somebody else their business card, that they've networked. And the thing is, it's now up to them if they decide they want to talk to you, forget about you, if they lose your card, anything like that. So you make sure you get their contact information. You take control of that relationship. Okay. You want them to remember you out of the other million people they meet and all the high fives, handshakes, and hugs. You're going to talk to them for maybe 2 minutes. You'll be a blip on their radar. But if you can say like, oh, I'm the one that went to your alma mater, or, my kid refuses to wear matching socks too, because that's just a weird thing that some kids do. They'll still have something to kind of hang their hat on when they remember you. Building rapport. So there's some stuff on like rapid rapport, and essentially you just want to make a really good, strong first impression. And sometimes, if they talk to you, you should be able to talk about, remember I talked about Fort, family, occupation, recreation, travel, and expertise, experiences. You should be able to kind of have a few minutes of conversation on those things. So you might consider, if you're a bit reserved or an introvert or something, kind of have a few stories that you can just share with them, that you can reciprocate if they mention something. And that kind of shows them that you're a real person, not just a mosquito that's kind of bugging them. And then always follow up within 72 hours. Even if they say like, I'm going to be in Spain all next week, just send the email and say, hey, I hope your trip in Spain's going well. Look forward to connecting afterwards, and whatever else you need to say. And then here's a question for you guys. You can drop this in the chat. How will you know that you've been successful at networking? Or you can come off mute if you like to. I'll start cold calling folks. And Raven jumped on it. Raven knew I was going to call her too. Okay, so plan a follow-up meeting. Excellent. Start constant communication. That's interesting. I feel like constant might be a bit strong of a word, but we'll touch on that. It says here, I'll know that I've successfully networked by watching my connection numbers increase. Okay, so I'm going to focus on quality, not quantity. If you're dealing with like, impressions on some sort of ad situation, like, yeah, you get 1 million people through there, you get a 1%, you've got some fraction of people that are actually buying your product, whatever that is. But it's a lot easier to just invest in some deep quality relationships than it is to try to like spread yourself thin and just have all these connections that you're either, one, neglecting the ones that matter, or two, trying to treat all of them the same. And that's going to burn you out, frankly. Consistent communication, better word. I like it. All right. Next time I reach out, they remember me. Glad to hear from me. That's good, Maya. I'm going to follow up on that in a little bit later. Fair quality versus quantity, keen way of viewing networking. Okay. I wasn't picking on. I feel like I was picking on you when you answer back. No, but that's a common misconception, actually. And that's kind of part of the reason I'm doing this workshop, but about the quality over quantity. All right, let's move on. So these are some things here about successfully networking. These are some of the other answers I tend to get from folks. Any thoughts on these? No. I think the last two are my favorite right here. They deliver and it never felt like networking. Those are the ones that I just really happen to like. All right. So developing that relationship. So you've already, bumped into them, you've got their business card. You need to be able to have some small talk. One thing that annoys me is when people are trying to build a relationship and they interrogate me or interview me. It really just bugs me because I don't know, it just feels like I'm being interrogated. And it might just be me, but if the questions are natural, by all means, bring them up. But elicitation is a different sort of conversation style. So it's ways to get people to give you information without necessarily asking for that information, because then sometimes it feels transactional sometimes to some people. Now, there's a recent book by Duhigg called Super Communicators, and he talks about conversations that involve values, beliefs, and experiences. And those are like not yes or no questions, not trivia questions. Those are ones that like really help you get to understand the person. Here I've got some free resources coming up for you. How to Talk to Anyone's great. That was a game changer for me. It's 93 little tips and tricks, and I think each one's like 2 pages long. If anybody needs to screenshot that, there you go. Think Fast, Talk Smart, great podcast. It talks about having some sort of framework if you wanted to like maybe tell that story of, this is my family or whatever the case may be. And how to win friends and influence people. I found that it's interesting because it feels like insincere, but if you really do care about somebody, you can work some of the little tips in there. Something as simple as saying someone's name is it's a minor thing, but especially if you're like on the phone, they don't get to see your body language or see your smile or like get the idea that you care about them. Hearing their name kind of like cues them into it. So that's just one example. But I assume everybody's got their screenshots if they need them. All right, so you've got the relationship going and you want to start solidifying that relationship. Now, be ethical in this because we do like cyber stalk people. We look them up on Google and LinkedIn and Google Scholar and all that stuff. Don't do anything weird. But the McKay 66 is used in the sales industry. And it's 66 questions that sort of give you a snapshot of your connection, your client, whatever it may be. Now, you'll notice the first section, if you wanted to download it and take a look at it, there's that QR code there. The first section is everything about them, right? So you can grab their business card. You can probably fill out that first section. Section 2 talks about essentially why would you want to talk to this person, what their relationship is into the business, what their role is, these sorts of questions. Section 3 is where you get them personally. So the things that make them a unique person as opposed to just the human resources officer. They play disc golf or they are in plays and stuff like that. The last part is where you come into play. So this is very focused all on them until the end. And then it starts talking about how you relate to them and what needs you can address and things like that. So here's a question for you. I think somebody commented on this. It might have been Maya, if I recall correctly. Which one of these do you think would be the best to hear? I was just talking about you. All right. I was just thinking about you. All right. Yeah. Now you're getting in their head, Monique. Look at you. So I guess part of it is why does that matter, right? Because I didn't put it on here, but who are you is probably the worst one to hear. Yeah. So yeah, if they recognize you, maybe they met you once for 1 minute and they see you again, they recognize you, that's still progress, right? And just the mere exposure is going to like be in your favor as long as you haven't done anything crazy. Remembering you means that like you have made enough of an impression. And if they're thinking about you, that means that they are seeing something in their environment that they think is relevant to you. But if they're talking about you, that means your reputation is preceding you. Like, so they may have found somebody they thought might be relevant to you and they're just sharing that you exist. So hopefully it's nothing bad. So as you nurture this relationship, you need to think about a few things. Some people just love social media. Some people, prefer to meet via Zoom. Other people, like I'm a texter personally. Can't remember who made a comment earlier about consistent contact or constant contact. I like to do this contact frequency is that they should not be surprised, but they also should not be annoyed. So there's a happy medium for everyone, and you'll have to figure out what that is. And the reasons you contact them for any given day, why would you want to talk to them? Sometimes it's just to say, hey, but other times it's more like, hey, I need your help. But remember that it's important to be comfortable just letting them go. If it's not a good fit, if it's too taxing, or, if they're asking you for everything and not giving anything in return, because networking does go both ways. So be mindful of that. There's a book by Adam Grant called Give and Take, and it talks about givers and takers. One of the interesting things is that he finds the top performers are all givers, but he also finds that the bottom performers are all givers as well. The difference being the givers at the bottom just never say no. The givers at the top will say yes, but they're very selective about when and to whom they say that. So being a giver is generally better. The other options are matchers and takers. If you're a taker, people tend to notice, so you get pushed out of the network. If you're a matcher, then the relationship tends to go more transactional, and it's sort of like what do you have for me today? What do you need from me today? And then you're not necessarily making friends or influencing people at that point. Is anybody familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? A show of hands or anything? Or
Yes, I'm a teacher. We use it often.
all right, well, you'll probably tell me I did something wrong here then, but you can teach me if you like. So you'll notice the first three levels here are comparable to that slide we saw a little while ago. But when you're working with people in your network, you're sort of going to try to train them and make sure they understand where you fit into things, right? So when they're able to look at information in their environment, analyze it, and say, hey, this is relevant to Monique, so I'm going to send this to her. That's where they get to say, I found something for you. And then when they're able to like really evaluate something and understand it at a deep level, they can say, hey, Raven, I've got an opportunity that's like just right for you. But in the best case scenario, you'll have someone that has sufficient influence and control over resources that they can say, I've created this thing that you need because I pulled strings. I had the ability to do that and I made it just for you. Now, when we look at stuff like contact frequency and the nature of that contact, you've got people you work with, you know, your friends, your family, all those guys that you see on a regular basis. So those are the kind of folks you walk away from and say, see you next time. And then at some point you might ask for, hey, can you get me a meeting or a connection or whatever that may be. Mentorship, a little different, depends on the nature of that relationship. So, you know, I've got mentors that are kind of in the ad hoc category. They're like, call me when you need me. I'm busy the rest of the time. You don't need to bother me. I won't take it personally if you don't ask about my family, but I'm here to help. And that's the way they choose to engage. I've got other people that, you know, I'm like, hey, how are your kids doing? Like, I know it's spring break. Are you going crazy or whatever? How's vacation? I know their families, their wives' names and stuff like that. So I've got people in that bucket as well. And then I've got people in my network who are more topic specific. And I'm like, hey, I have this very select methods question. And I've done all my homework and I've come up with no answer. What do you got on this? When you look at dormant people, these are the folks that maybe went to undergrad with you, went to high school with you. They're back home. You've moved away, and you know you get to come through and say, "Hey, I'll be in town. You know, you want to grab coffee, stuff like that." These are the people that'll surprise you sometimes. I will say, if you are going to reactivate a dormant contact, don't reactivate with an ask. So you know, just kind of hit them up a few times beforehand. And then you've got sleepers like I don't think anybody needs like, I don't know, a pet store owner, right? But if your puppy gets sick randomly like 3 weeks from now, you might be glad you knew him just to ask him a quick question. So those are the people that have skill sets that you don't necessarily need, but you know, they're around. And those are the people that you kind of push into that personal relationship versus that professional relationship transactions and stuff like that. Yeah. I was trying to be creative. Any thoughts?
Somebody has to have a thought.
I like it. Okay, that's fair. Now, why would I put a random haiku in the middle of a presentation on networking? That's probably a better question. Because
So we
today,
can think of you as a poet.
true, but also because April 17th is Haiku Poetry Day.
Oh,
That being said, these are all excuses to talk to people that you haven't talked to in a while. And there's a website too. I apologize, I forgot it. It's time and date something or other. It gives you like pretty much a random day for every day of the year. It's not random, it's actually a real day. But you know, I know like, hey, my friend Lauren, she likes ice cream sundaes. She's definitely getting a text on ice cream Sunday day. And I like donuts, so I always go to Dunkin' Donuts on International Donut Day. But these are just, you know, if you know this person well enough that when they get this random text message from you that says, hey, I was thinking about you, boom, it builds that relationship. It shows them that you think about them, that you care, right? But in conclusion, basically it's all up to you. You have to own it, right? You control the relationship. You do not control the person. So don't try to be manipulative or anything crazy like that. You just make sure that you keep the door open on your end and that they want to walk through it. Always network with a purpose. You initiate that relationship, know what you bring to that relationship, nurture that relationship, and then you can reap the rewards of that relationship. So, any questions?
Questions. Who has questions? Now, just in case someone here disconnects, 5 minutes later goes, man, I wish I had asked that. How should they connect with you?
Well, they've got my email address there in the chat on the screen,
Okay.
and they have a QR code if they want to fill out the survey. And I think there's a spot in there to drop their email address. Or they can find me on LinkedIn, Rohan Crawley.
So the email address is right there.
Yeah.
And you can connect with him on LinkedIn, follow him there. And
tell me
use
why
the
you're following me though. tell me he's like met me here. Otherwise, I'll be like, who is this person? So.
There is now in the chat all of the information you need, including the pronunciation of his name, Rowan.
While our participants are synthesizing what was learned, I did have a question for you.
Sure.
One, this was impeccable. I thoroughly enjoyed the hands-on and interactiveness of it. Outstanding work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Considering action researches, if you will, can you share with us how you predict networking has changed pre and post pandemic and some potential trends for it within the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I will say that Zoom has made things a lot easier. So you can establish and maintain those relationships over long distances. Whereas, historically, if you were going to do research in, say Central Asia, then you might have to like just fly out there over the summer, spend 3 months there. Whereas now you can just like, hey, let's jump on Zoom. And it's not as big a deal to kind of give them like, access to Wi-Fi or something and just say like, we'll meet weekly or monthly for however long that is. So that lets you build that relationship over a long period of time. So it's kind of like trust. I think it's a Turkish saying, trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. So you're putting those drops in over a longer period of time. And that helps facilitate that relationship. It makes it stronger and things like that. How it's going to change in the future? Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think COVID kind of like did like a reset on everything, really. So I think that the Zoom's going to be probably the biggest difference going forward. I don't know. Any other thoughts on that? That's actually a good question about what we see in the future.
Part of my research is futurism as well. So as I mentioned, I'm a K through 12 teacher, and I'm paying attention to how Generation A, which were usually born after 2012, are starting to network. Most of them are born, if you will, with devices in their hand, and they even speak verbally in text. For example, they'll say LOL instead of laughing.
I know.
So I was just wanting to hear from your expertise how you view networking as evolving.
Yeah, and so you bring up a good point, right? Because a lot of people have, we'll say, strong feelings about tech mediated communications, right? Like if a kid talks to me and says LOL, I'm like, just laugh like an adult. It's okay, But at the same time, that's still conveying a sentiment and an idea and like answering an emotional bid and validation to whoever they're talking to. So we didn't have this is how you text conversations when we were in elementary school. We had this is how you write a letter. You always say please and thank you. You always, address whoever as Mr. or Miss and stuff like that. Like, today their conversations are probably going to be something more like, you don't have to spell out the full word please. You can just say PLS or use emojis, even though they look depending on who you're talking to, they might look immature or they might contextualize your statement. And you see across the generations, people will respond very differently to that. So I'm actually, based on your question, a little bit more interested in the intergenerational networking, right? Because I don't know how Bill Gates responds if you just send him like a whole bunch of pictures and that's not hieroglyphics, it's a sentence. So but,
That's fair. Thank you.
so we have a question in the chat here. As a fellow PhD student, how do you balance networking with your academic responsibilities and commitments? Well, for me, it's easy because I only network with people I care about, and there's always time for people I care about. And I don't have too many people that I care about trying to get on my schedule in such a way that I'm annoyed by it. So I guess that sort of just happens, build those deep relationships. And then it's also, I think everybody has a friend that you haven't talked to in a while, but you call them like annually and you pick up like you just saw each other last week. So I think a lot of those relationships, because they're developed at conferences, that's where a lot of them tend to kind of shake out like that a bit. And then, of course, I have folks that I've just known for a long time before this. So it's interesting to have sort of accesses to different levels of networks and different types of networks. And then a second question here, have you ever faced rejection or negative experiences while networking? If so, how do you bounce back from them? I probably did, but I don't hang on to them. So for me, it's not really bouncing back, it's just moving on, really. I'm sure somebody doesn't like me. I just can't think of who they are because I don't let them live in my head rent free. So
I
That's
think
funny. Oh, go ahead.
I think when I got into the faculty space, I saw this quote of sometimes you have to come to your closed doors before you get to your open doors.
mhm.
Um, for the one person that I tried to get, and I loved their work,
Yeah.
maybe not as much now, and I got 3 minutes, it's going to the next person.
Mhm.
And that next person loved their work, but said, I can see you. It was like 2 or 3 months later, I can give you a day. It was like, whatever.
Mhm.
No, but it's going to the next person.
Mhm.
And now being sort of entrenched in the faculty space, knowing what that feeling is like,
Mhm.
it's being more open to, okay, I've got this space, but giving back, knowing what it was like when you were that person who just wanted to know and
Mhm.
wanted to be a sponge. And that's one of the things I said in my interview is that just being a sponge, that it's not the title of being teaching,
Mhm.
but just being that sponge to learn, being excited to learn, be excited to interact. And the dean was like, I've heard enough. Let's get you a class.
That's awesome.
Because I think that's what's important is when
Mhm.
you're that person seeking information and someone's just closing that door, is not being afraid of that word no.
Yeah.
Because somebody's going to say yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to think of no as numerous opportunities because you've just ruled out one thing that's not going to work and you still have the rest of the world ahead of you.
hmm Uh, hey, uh, awesome presentation. I love when I can attend a presentation and take nuggets away. And in this case, I actually was able to write something and stick it into my cubicle because I like to be able to view important things as reminders. But so really great, nuggets that you've dropped in this presentation. I have a question about I guess being the mentor slash advocate versus seeking mentorship slash an advocate. Um, is it, in your opinion, is it kind of like a transaction, like let's say treat others like you want to be treated kind of things, or is it more of like a treat others the way they want to be treated kind of things when you're in the mentor seat versus the mentee seat, or advocate versus the advocate person?
Well, I would say that if you know how they want to be treated, it's generally better to treat them that way. If you treat them as you want to be treated, 9 times out of 10, most people don't want to be mistreated. So that doesn't go too horribly wrong. Uh, but yeah, I mean, if you were trying to establish a relationship with someone, it's almost like dating to a degree. Like you want to make sure that you have your best foot forward and you're showing them that like you're worth their time in whatever capacity that is. So I'm not sure if that actually answers your question.
I mean, I guess I kind of asked it weirdly, honestly, but I guess what I'm asking is if I am a person trying to build the relationship with somebody, like I have, these set things that I'm looking for as
Mhm.
far as like, the person providing their time to me, them engaging in what I'm saying, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
Now, on the flip side, someone approaches me and now I'm the SME or I'm the person that they're needing for
Mhm.
whatever reason.
Yeah.
Am I giving them what I would want the person in my position? I'm asking it so weird, but
Yeah. I think
like,
I think
okay,
if I understand you correctly, so I think we both understand if you're seeking something, you should treat them as they want to be treated. But when somebody wants something from you, do you treat them as they want to be treated, or do you treat them as you would rather be treated? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, yeah, basically.
Well, I mean, I think you should treat them with dignity and respect, and the way that that comes across depends on the culture and context. But since there is a power dynamic, you are allowed to say, "Hey, don't call me after 9," or "I prefer text messages." It's perfectly okay to like set boundaries that are like that and tell them your preferences. And you can say, "Hey, if you email me, I'll get to you when I get to you. If you text me, I'll get to you within an hour," or whatever that looks like for you. Is that helpful?
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you.
You're writing that down too.
Well, honestly, so I like, yeah, like I said, I have quotes and things that I pull from people. What I took from this, everything, there was so many,
Nice.
but I took the fort aspects. I absolutely loved that. And so I'm definitely going to internalize that.
Okay. And then try to do it in a foreign language. That's what it's usually used for is speaking.
Yeah, yeah. Well, which is also something that I'm learning. So yeah, this
Awesome.
is
Which language?
awesome. I'm sorry.
Which language?
Japanese.
Oh, nice. Have you been to Japan? Are you going? What's going on there?
Yeah, yeah.
Networking with in
So
Japan.
yeah, well, so right around the pandemic, I was actually accepted to a fellowship. It was a research fellowship, where I would have been living and doing research for a year
Mhm.
at a Japanese university, with an advisor and everything.
Awesome.
But then pandemic and all of
Mhm.
that. So the opportunity was unfortunately postponed for like a year and a half, and then I eventually had to decline it. But
Oh,
during that, I kind of the one of the other goals of the fellowship was to do uh, language acquisition. And so I started self-teaching to kind
nice.
of prep myself to then take the, intensive classes when I got there.
Mhm.
But, since it didn't happen, I just decided that I mean, I still want to learn the language. I still want to live there someday. So I'm kind of trying to stick with it.
Yeah. Japanese for Busy People. It's a pretty good book series, and it teaches you the spoken language as well as the written language.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of PDFs online that you can download it now instead of having to go buy the fresh one. But I bought it for my niece and nephew because they're both into anime. So I figured they could talk to each other in something that resembles a secret language. And then I'll just kind of heckle them in what little Japanese I remember. So,
No, that's sweet.
yeah.
Thanks.
Now, just a reminder to fill out the evaluation, please. We really use this information to help improve the series and to make sure that the one in the fall is even more impactful than the one this spring. We have time for one last question. Does anybody have one last question for our presenter?
I feel like Raven and Maya need to be language buddies here. I see Maya's learning. I'm sorry,
See
Raven's learning
one new
Japanese.
message that we have thank yous coming in. Well, hopefully, now that you've attended this session, you feel more comfortable in reaching out. You are able to confidently approach and connect with new people. You can develop meaningful relationships that will drive your career growth and utilize your targeted networking strategies to help achieve your specific career goals. I'm Marlon Jones, again, the moderator, and we want to thank you for spending your time with us today. We thank our presenter, Rowan Crawley, for this insightful presentation, telling you ways to go beyond the business card so that you can develop networking. We thank you for participating in this spring workshop series with the Black Doctoral Network. And we are looking forward to the time when we can call you Dr. Crowley.
Thank you very much.
So we wish you all a wonderful evening and an impactful week.